cuts at West Midlands Police, probably 1,000 or so uniformed officers.
And I know that an officer from the counter-terrorism unit that you visited, a senior counter-terrorism officer, has told 5 Live Breakfast that the English Defence League is fueling Islamic extremism. Superintendent John Larkin from that unit says its activities are turning parts of Britain into fertile recruiting ground for potential terrorists. Here he is.
In some areas we have evidence that once they've gone away and the policing and the high-profile policing of the event has occurred, there's fertile ground for those groups who would come into the area to encourage people to have this reality for them of this is the way white Western society sees us, and that's a potential recruiting carrot really for people. And that's what some of these radicalisers look for. They look for the vulnerability, they look for the hook to pull people through, and the EDL, when they've been and done what they've done, they actually perversely leave that behind.
Well, listening to that is the leader of the English Defence League, Tommy Robinson. Good morning.
Good morning.
How do you react to the accusation that extremism breeds extremism, hatred breeds hatred? You are feeding into their narrative, and their narrative feeds into yours, and so it goes on in a spiral of hatred.
Well, sort of blaming us. 9/11 was our fault. 7/7 was our fault. There's been 17,000 worldwide terrorist attacks since September 11th. I guess they're our fault. I guess the last 1,400 years of history where Islam's been at war with non-Islam is our fault. It's ridiculous. We're not the cause. The root cause of the problem is the Quran. It's Islam. And no one has got the balls to admit it and say it and talk about it. We will. We're not causing these divisions and this extremism. It's already there. That's why we formed. If there was no militant Islam, there would be no EDL. But we need to form to combat it. And the funny thing is, the head of counter-terrorism for the West Midlands is a fellow called Anil Bhattani, a Muslim. And he will go to great lengths to stop people realising what Islam is. 2 years ago, there was a documentary made for Dispatches where they went undercover into the Green Lane Mosque, a supposed beacon of moderation mosque, and then they showed videos of extremism, Sharia law being preached, anti-democracy, homophobic, all this stuff being preached in that mosque. And then his decision as the head of public order at the time, with West Muslim Police Force, was to go and raid Channel 4 documentary makers and charge them with inciting religious hatred. The outcome of it was that the West Midlands Police Force had to pay £140,000 compensation to Channel 4, but the reason for it was to put the fear into any other documentary makers that wish to expose Islam for what it is. Islam is not a religion of peace. It never has been.
I'm hearing the Assistant Chief Constable is not actually
no, I didn't say the assistant. I said that Anil Bhattani, who's one of the head figures in counter-terrorism.
I'm being told he's not a Muslim. We'll check that out. That's what I'm hearing at the moment.
Anil Bhattani, who's one of the head figures in West Midlands counter-terrorism unit, is a Muslim, and he's the Muslim that made the decision.
We'll check it out. Whatever. But let's talk about this. Let's have a civilised conversation about this, and I'll ask you some other questions if I may. You say the problem is the Quran, and you say the problem is militant Islam. Don't you really mean that the problem is Islam generally?
No, I mean the problem is when someone takes a 7th century book and tries to implement it in its barbaric way that it was in the 7th century to the word, then we have a problem. And that's the problem we've got, is that people are taking the Quran as the word of God.
I suppose, Tommy, that some people do. I mean, you're right, there are violent passages in the Quran, just as there are passages of peace. There are violent passages in the Old Testament as well.
But you're correct, in the Old Testament, not the New Testament, because we've adapted it, and we've adapted it in modern life, and which we want to live in peace. But when did you not accept that many Muslims are, they have adapted it too? They live in peace. They're not violent people. They haven't adapted it. The Quran's never been adapted. It never will be. They won't adapt it.
But there are many ways. There are many ways to interpret it.
There's many ways to interpret it, but there's not many ways of interpreting strike fear into the heart of the disbeliever. There's not many ways of interpreting do not take Jews or Christians as your friends, lay in wait ready to ambush them. There's many ways of not interpreting cut their noses off so the front of their faces looks like the back of their neck. These sort of things that are in the Quran, which they refuse to take out, are the problem.
Why don't you? Okay, I mean, without going down the theological route at the moment, if you're talking about excising language which is inappropriate from the modern age, why do you not excise some some of the abusive language on your Facebook page, such as ethnic cleansing is the only way out of this mess caused by Labour traitors. Soon freedom fighters will fight Muslim filth in the streets of London, such as start mass castration unless they crawl back under the stone they came from, such as set fire to all mosques. Yeah, but I'm only asking because you're talking about taking out inappropriate language from the Quran and inappropriate verses. Why don't you have a look at your Facebook page? Do you completely dissociate yourself from those very many comments? There are very many comments on there I could not possibly even say on the radio.
Yes, I do. Well, we have been so inundated, and our Facebook page has recently, with massive activity. Tens of thousands of people joined us in the last week over the burning of poppies. And when you look at when those poppies were burned, BBC News blackout. BBC News media blackout. They didn't show the country that militant Muslims were burning poppies, and then they made no arrests. And do you know who was arrested for that? I was arrested for trying to stop them burn poppies. And then the next day, BBC News' headline was "Leader of the English Defence League arrested." So they're not showing everyone what's going on. We're not seeing the true picture across the country because of media blackout, because they don't want people realising what's going on. And the problem is not our community. The problem is the Islamic community. The problem is militant Islam. And the fact is, he's saying that we leave it as fertile breeding ground for extremists. Every single Islamic community in this country is already fertile breeding ground for extremists. They've got stalls set up in every town and city. No one's stopping them. I don't see the Islamic community coming out and forcefully stopping them. I don't see anyone doing anything.
You're very angry, aren't you?
I'm not angry, no. I'm shocked that a police officer is blaming the working class community of this country again for militant Islam.
Let's get Phil, you can tell us about Neil Patani. Is he or is he not a Muslim?
He's definitely not a Muslim, no. He is the Assistant Chief Constable at West Midlands Police, whose special role is obviously overlooking counter-terrorism. So he's right about that, but he's definitely not a Muslim. I think his background is Hindu. I don't know whether that's particularly relevant, but he's certainly not a Muslim.
Enil Patani is a Muslim.
He's not.
Okay, if you don't want your viewers to believe he's a Muslim, as again...
Listeners, but Phil is not... I mean, you're 100%, Phil, yeah? Right, okay. Thank you very much. What vision, let me just ask you, what is your vision of Britain? What kind of Britain would you like to see if you could...
I'd like to see a peaceful Britain. I'm worried about the situation.
Are you helping that?
We need to combat it. I'm worried because I've got children, and the next 30 years for this country, if it goes the way it has gone, is really worrying. It's not a pleasant future. We have got more extremists and more militant Muslims and more terrorists than we have ever had. We have got more madrasas opening, teaching Sharia law, teaching anti-democracy. It's a ticking time bomb, and no one dare talk about it. And all we're trying to do is talk about it. We're just, when we don't go and protest, that's our cry for help. It's our cry for help to the politicians. Come and live where we're living. Come and see what we're seeing. Middle England, wake up, because it's coming to a town near you, and someone needs to get a grip on it.
What about those people who some may recognise this in the appalling, vile groups such as Muhajirun, which many say just echo the vileness of some argue echo the vileness of your groups, sort of mirror it. But what about those people who live, cheek by jowl with Muslims? I have great friends who are Muslims. Are some of your best friends Muslims?
I know Muslims like that. I've grown up in Luton. I know some great Muslims. I'm not denying there's not great Muslims. What I'm saying is the voice box for the Muslim community, all the groups that our government,
communities.
Our police
it's more complex than that.
Well, all the groups, our police forces and our government sit down with, like, the Muslim Council of Britain, like Birmingham Green Lane Mosque. They're all Islamists and Islamism. They want to enforce their way of life. So, yes, there are moderate groups out there, but they're not the ones that are getting spoken to. They're not the ones that are voicing the Muslim community's voice. Why the Muslim Council of Britain? Who do they represent to sit down with our government? Our government go and sit down with them after 7/7 and sit around the table. These are people who have openly said they want Israel wiped off the map.
Tommy Robinson.
Thank you.
Thank you. The leader of the English Defence League.